You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast, a place for real conversations with people who love someone with the disease of addiction. Now here is your host, Margaret Swift Thompson.
Welcome back. Today is going to be a different episode, a series that really touched my heart because I connected so much to my guest's story in many ways. And as we go through the 3 episodes, you'll see why. I'm excited to introduce you to Jorja Jamison. Jorja has written a book which will be published this fall. You're all getting a sneak peek, a window into this incredibly powerful book that will be coming out. Jorja gives one of the clearest descriptions of powerlessness that I have ever heard as she shares the story of addiction within her family and her own personal surrender to recovery. This conversation stirred many painful memories and feelings up for me as we shared some similarities while working in the treatment field. Meet Jorja Jamison.
The Embrace Family Recovery Podcast.
I am so thrilled, Jorja, to have you on Embrace Family Recovery. I think your message is so vital for us as professionals to hear, but also for families and people who have this illness to hear, because we are human, and that comes through loud and clear. But Jorja Jamison, what is going to be the title of your book? Have you finalized that? I know Wounded Healer. Is that going to be it?
So the title I would like to have it is Wounded Healing, the Art and Soul of Survival. Wounded healing in particular, because I wanted to have that active healing part, that it's not just that some individuals are wounded healers, but that we're actively wounded and actively healing all at the same time.
I love that. It is about action. Recovery is in general about action. So Jorja, if you were to give an intro to the listeners who are primarily loved ones, but can be many, many people who are joining the podcast, which is so exciting, how would you introduce yourself? What would be the descriptor you would present as your introduction?
So I am a licensed psychologist in the state of Minnesota, and I work as a professor at the Hazel and Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies. And then I also identify as a person in lifelong recovery who's had my own journey and my own journey as a family member for, as many of us do.
Yeah. And are you comfortable with sharing who your qualifier is that you identify being a family member?
Pretty much anybody in my family would be a qualifier.
Fair enough.
Certainly. However, we just lost my father to this disease last spring. And so that's the most recent one.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
From the lens of family, being the family, before we get into your own journey, when's your first recollection of this isn't what everybody does? This isn't, quote, normal. Do you remember what age?
I probably didn't really reflect on what was normal until I was in my 20s, because when you're a child, it is whatever is around is normal. But I remember sometime in my 20s thinking, you know how every Sunday morning we used to get up and it was like the thing to go around and collect all the empty beer cans that were scattered on the deck and throughout the house. Maybe that's not what most families did. That was something that was, different in our family.
I remember my youngest, because I'm in recovery also, and we share some common parts of our story. It was actually uncanny to read your book, Jorja, and hear things and connect to things that were so similar to my own journey. There are obviously differences, but I was touched by some of the similarities. And I remember my daughter going to a friend's house for dinner and a sleepover, and they had a glass of wine. And she came home and was pretty freaked out, not because they did anything wrong, but because it was so not normal for her to see it. And I think that's true for a lot of children in these family situations on either extreme or anywhere in the middle. We don't know what isn't normal outside our house, but if we go to other children's houses when we're little, boy, do we get exposure to things that make us wonder what is going on, what is happening.
Well, I think part of it was because anything that felt abnormal, we were told, no, this is normal. And so there was sort of that message that came along with it, that this is what every family does. This is what most weekends look like for most people.
Got it. What led you to take the step at this point in your career? Because you have a very respectful career. You've done so well for yourself. And talk about going against the odds, of what you were raised under and around. What made you write this book?
It's really incredible that if you had gone back 10 years and said, one day, all this stuff you're going through, not only are you going to be admitting that these things happen, but you're going to be talking about them openly and without any shame. You would have just been an alien to me. For, most of my using career, it was all about keeping the secret, keeping the shame, keeping the appearance. And the thought of any truth getting out would have, it was just like you'd want to disappear into a puddle. And then probably about 5 years into my recovery, I had heard enough feedback from people in the groups. I'm a member of a couple of 12-step groups, and I had heard enough feedback from some of my fellows who had said, we love it when you share this story or that sort of stuff. And so I started to kind of think, maybe I do have a book in me. And then the pandemic happened. And all of a sudden it was like, you know what, I'm going to take a year and just write and see what comes out. And this is what came out. It just came pouring out. For a few years, I kept a little note on my phone of here's different chapter titles or different things to kind of organize. And then so I started there, and then things just kept building. Chapters almost wrote themselves. It just really did come pouring out of me.
How did it feel to write it? Was that different than telling? Because you speak at meetings, you share in your story, probably share through your teaching, different parts of your story. How did it feel to write it? Was it different?
It felt very quiet and very honest. And it felt very, very whole. For me, the biggest hurdle to my recovery was overcoming shame. And once I had overcome the shame, it was very easy for me to talk about things that I've been through. But there's also this line that I'm going to be blending because most people don't publicly know my story. This is going to be, more and more people are going to publicly know my story. And so this will be more unveiling, more, sort of merging of professional and personal life and, sort of all this stuff. But it just feels, I don't know, it just feels very quiet, very content. It's not that it's not easy.
No.
But it just feels right.
What a great feeling that must be.
It's incredible. For decades of my life, I never, ever felt that way.
Right.
And for me, that's been the biggest gift of recovery is I don't have to live in shame anymore. I don't have to, think I'm the worst thing that ever lived.
I can relate. I know that people listening are screaming, how'd you do it? How did you overcome shame? That's a big one for many people, whether family or person who identifies as being a recovering person in the disease model. How'd you do it?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because there's a chapter in the book where I actually say, I think I've been diagnosed with 10 or 11 different mental health diagnoses, from depression to bipolar to opioid use disorder, anxiety, all kinds of other stuff. But what I really think I had is shame disorder. And that I really think that what was wrong with me was I was so enveloped with shame, I could not see myself and could not interact with the world. And so for me, it really was a process. It was just the long, slogging daily process. I'd say probably about 3 years into abstinence, I remember I was sitting at my desk at work, and I had a couple of home groups at the time, but none of them read what's called the promises in Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 statements of what comes true and sort of all that stuff.
Yep.
And I remember sitting at my desk, and all of a sudden I had this feeling of like, life's not so hard anymore. Like, it actually is kind of pleasant. And like, this gray cloud always was around me, and it's not. I feel bright sunshine now. And I quickly Googled the 12 promises, and I read the 12 statements, and I was like, holy crap, every single one of them. It was right there. And so somehow in the work that I had done in really intensive individual therapy, really intensive substance use treatment, and really intensive 12-step recovery, things just finally started to clear and make sense. But I think the biggest thing was that I finally was honest.
Yeah.
I wasn't hiding any part of me. And as long as I hid any little part of me, that was enough for the shame to hold on. But when I was just that finally willing to be as broken and busted a person in front of other people, that was what for me was the key to healing.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you.
Anyone enjoy book clubs? I do, for a few reasons. I read books that I would not normally choose to read, and I really value listening to other people who've read books share their experience with what they learned, read, and heard. So in that vein, I'm beginning the Embrace Family Recovery Free Virtual Book Club starting Thursday, April 18th at noon Eastern Standard Time for anyone who wants to join. Oh, yeah. What's the book? The book is Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima. I chose this after learning more about Jamie's story, feeling a connection with her, and wanting to eradicate the core belief and story in my head that has always said, I'm not enough. This book club is for anyone, and I welcome anyone who wants to dive into the lies that we have let stop us from believing we are worthy. Check out my show notes for links to my website, embracefamilyrecovery.com, to learn more and register. Also, really cool, I have happened to come across an extra copy of the book Worthy, which is really hard to find right now as they're selling out. So I will send to the 10th person who registers for this book club their free copy of Worthy. Can't wait to see you on April 18th. Let's get ready to do a deep dive into the book Worthy on a monthly basis.
You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast. Can you relate to what you're hearing? Never miss a show by hitting the subscribe button. Now back to the show.
How many years into abstinence?
So this September will be 8.
And how many in, and congratulations, that is no small feat. How many years in did you get to that point of the promises?
Probably about year 3. Yeah, it was probably the 3rd year.
That's important. It can be different for everybody, but I think it's important to share that it's a journey, right? It's not an on-off switch, which a lot of families struggle with. They don't understand that.
I like to think of it as more like if you ever go to a theater show and you know how they have the lights that sort of are always zooming around and the spotlights that are kind of zooming around. I kind of feel like the promises in happiness are about, like, the lights are always going to be zooming around. It's about finding the moments where they're all focused on the same thing, but they're always going to be moving in and out, up and down, all around. And it's really just about recognizing when they all come together, just appreciating that.
Yeah, it's a great way to say it. I feel like in my journey, I was always wanting recovery to look like Disney World every day. And that was a huge letdown when I finally got in, not because what I have is not great. I had this delusion that I was supposed to be joyous, happy, and excited and wonderful every day of every year. And that was such a lie my disease told me. So I really appreciate that visual of when those spotlights come together, because we couldn't even feel those when we were using.
No, we were, in the dark in a closet downstairs, like that was our existence.
Right.
We didn't even know there were spotlights.
Right.
But for me, it really is that I have found that the promises, that contentment, that happiness are not something you can strive for or work for. But if you work for basic principles of recovery, the honesty, the openness, the willingness, if that is what you set your sights on, then the others manifest on their own.
And like you said, when you read it, you were almost shocked because they were all happening. It wasn't a conscious striving for anyone in particular. You read through it and went, wow, look at the change. Did you feel the same way I did, Jorja, that as you were going on the journey of recovery, you were kind of the last one to notice the change, that others who cared for you, who were close to you, started to see it maybe and were able to recognize it before you were?
I don't think I had that, because I've always had such a mask, always had such a outward facing mask, that I was pretty good at fooling people, which is one of the reasons my disease went as long as it did. And for me, it really was that inner reflection. It is the same thing. We see this all the time with people who are coming into recovery. Like, we see their beautiful souls. We see just how awesome and special they are, and they can't see it for themselves. And I imagine mine was the same way, that I, sort of had that experience as well. But for me to actually feel that internalized, that not only am I okay, I'm actually a pretty good person, and I am equipped to deal with whatever life brings me. Like, that was just transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. You also are a very strong person, a survivor. You have tenacity. You have fought for life and accomplished a great deal despite a lot of odds. Where do you think that comes from within you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not even sure. This is what I teach my students and I teach my clients. Stubbornness and perseverance are the exact same thing. They're just used in different ways, but they're both about stick-to-itiveness. And stubbornness is when you sort of use it for ill, and perseverance is when you use it for good. But that stick-to-itiveness, I think I come from a long line of hard workers, the really hard work ethic. And I think that's probably where it begins. Yeah, I'm not even sure where it actually comes from, but most of my family has it.
Yeah. I think that the way you just described it, also how it feeds into addiction, because we are stubborn in that realm too, right? I mean, that you mentioned that your mask afforded or allowed for your disease to go a lot longer because it was well intact. People wouldn't know. What was your final awakening? I don't know if you call it a bottom, whatever it was for you that you said, whoa, something has to give.
Yeah, I think it was just the inner misery. For 3 years, I was part of a program here in the state of Minnesota that monitors healthcare providers for people who are in recovery or need help. And it's a 3-year program. There's quarterly reports from your therapist, from your psychiatrist, from your boss. There's random drug testing. There's all kinds of stuff that's part of it. And I had figured out a way, or I just was incredibly lucky, that I was able to use sporadically through that. And then I came off of that program, and I literally drove from my last drug test, drove home and fished out the 6 pills of opiates that I had collected over the previous 2 years and took them all at once. I hadn't even been off the program for 5 minutes and sort of had to do that. But what it did was, because I was no longer being monitored and these reports weren't being filed, I finally thought I could get honest with my therapist. And so the next visit in for therapy, I went in, I made sure all the releases were revoked, that anything I was about to say was not going to get reported back to anyone. And then I told her everything. and still had to work probably for another 4 months, because that was April and it was September, another 4 or 5 months before I was ready to tell the second person, which turned out to be, it's my eventual wife. But there was something in me that knew there is no telling one other person. I'm going to have to tell everyone. And it was a process of getting ready. I think somewhere in my physical being knew that it was going to be a really hard road, and just maybe wanted to give me a few months to kind of prepare and shore up and then do it.
I think of all of the people out there who delusionally believe it should be easy. Just stop. Don't do it. Can't you see what it's doing to your life? I think of the lengths that you describe going to hide it, to use it, despite the misery, the internal pain, the shame, the fear of getting caught, the fear of being found out, the thrill of getting away, all of the stuff that goes into it. It's exhausting and soul destroying.
It really is.
And if that's not an example of powerlessness 101, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The description that I resonate with is our addiction is a pathological relationship with a substance or behavior that supersedes every other human need we have. And that is not something you just switch off. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
When you were using and working in the field and teaching, can you give us a window into how that was for you as a human being?
I actually don't remember a lot of emotions connected to it, because I think I was completely cut off from my emotions.
Sure.
If the 3 rules of an alcoholic family system are don't talk, don't feel, don't trust. I mean, I was operating under those rules long after I left my family.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember it was just this feeling of no way out, this feeling of the worst thing in the world would be to be found out. And, I had to protect my image at all costs, which is interesting because that really does come from my family of origin, that outwardly we were the well-adjusted, happy, successful family. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I got lots and lots of lessons of how to pretend that you're doing okay.
Right.
And it really is, it just became a way of life. I didn't even know that the life I live now is possible. And I've worked in this field for over 2 decades, but I didn't think it was possible for me.
Yeah. The similarity we share, I was walking the halls of Hazelden working on extended care, and I was face first in food. Every time a client was in my office, I was preoccupied with what I was going to eat, but somehow it was different for me than what I was working with my clients to try and achieve in their sobriety and recovery. And I remember feeling, here I am in the most wonderful treatment center, seeing these miracles in front of me. If anyone ever knew what I was doing, I would be ruined. And why can't I? Why am that uniqueness? Like, I have to be different. It's not going to work for me. Not even letting myself see food addiction as legitimate, like chemical dependency. That's a whole nother issue. But the fear of being found out, the fear of being this fraud, the fact that I could pull it off without reading the damn big book, because I was so shocked when I read it and food jumped off the page at me. I shut that book in my training year at Hazelden.
Oh, that's hilarious. So, and mine was actually a little bit different, because I entered 12-step recovery back in 2004 and had been an active member of 12-step recovery pretty much since then. I don't think I've ever gone more than 3 weeks without missing a meeting. Mm-hmm. Even during my whole career of using, I used for the first 11 years that I was in the program. I couldn't stop using, but I knew the big book inside and out. I knew all the principles. I knew how to coach people through it. I knew how to, do all these things. But there was this sort of block of that it's not going to work for me. Uh-huh. I'm too damaged. I'm too broken. And so the best I can hope for is to slough through life with this outward facing mask. And that is the best I can hope for.
It's painful. It's painful to hear. It's painful to imagine. It's painful to remember.
Not feeling recovery is possible for me hits hard. This is what the disease of addiction told me for decades. What a lie it is. Come back next week and hear more of Jorja's experience, strength, and hope as we move into her recovery journey.
I want to thank my guest for their courage and vulnerability in sharing parts of their story. Please find resources on my website, embracefamilyrecovery.com. This is Margaret Swift Thompson. Until next time, please take care of you